Hello, my name is Chelsea Waite. I'm a doctoral student at UW-Milwaukee in the architecture department and the Buildings, Landscapes, Cultures doctoral program. I am a light-skinned woman, femme presenting with long dark brown hair, wearing a blue blazer with light makeup. So I have been the coordinator for the Buildings, Landscapes, Cultures Field School for a number of years now. Seen it through several phases, and I want to give a presentation now about the history and methods of our program. So first, this is an overview of the field school. That is just one of the programs we offer in Buildings, Landscapes, Cultures, and I will contextualize it a little bit within the history of our program. In this slide, you see the title, the Buildings, Landscapes, Cultures Field School, as well as an image of a group about 13, 14 people gathered around a painting of children eating ice cream in an outdoor space, some wearing reflective vests, a number of different skin tones, and in an urban residential environment. So first, what is a field school? It is a short academic program consisting of mentored field research. And I have an image on this slide that depicts kind of an ordinary day in the life of the field school. This image is of a traditional Milwaukee duplex, a wooden residential home that is 3 stories with a high-pitched angular roof, 2 porches, one on the first floor, one on the second floor, and a kind of a triptych of windows in the attic. This is a shingled house with yellow architectural detailing, some interesting scroll work, and there are boards on the windows. There are 3 students measuring and drawing on the porch and on the steps, and 2 older people, men, masculine presenting, who are gesturing and talking on the side of the house. There's a number of plants growing on the house and a couple of trees in the foreground. So the people discussing in this image are our instructor, our professor, Arijit Sen, in the BLC t-shirt, and in the white shirt, Dr. Jeff Klee, formerly of Colonial Williamsburg, who is an expert in field research on architecture and landscapes. The field school in general takes place during the summer. It is designed to provide practical training in research and documentation. It focuses on the applied side of theory outside of classrooms and in quote unquote the real world. And it is an experiential program in which students learn by interacting with people, places, and objects. On this next slide, we have some maxims about fieldwork and 3 images of students doing the measurements and documentation of buildings. So I've taken these maxims and adapted them from Jeff Klee. First, fieldwork is humanistic and it's humanizing. It describes human behavior, but also kind of the meaning behind the ordinary. Fieldwork requires open-mindedness. It requires not making assumptions, and often we are looking at rather ordinary, ordinary quote-unquote data or ordinary subjects, such as the lower right image with 2 students documenting what appears to be a garage. There's wooden framing. We can see all sorts of things stored, mower, car batteries, furniture, recreational equipment, holiday decor. It looks like this kind of standard American garage in whatever form that might be. So to many people, this would look very ordinary, very straightforward. We understand what's going there. There's no need to research more. But once we looked beneath the surface, we found some really interesting old techniques of hewing wood we found kind of these cultural patterns, such as holiday decor for the lawn. They really have a lot of story and meaning behind them. There's also a sign we can see in the background, thank you for slowing down. That says a lot about safety and care for one's world. Fieldwork involves holistic perception. You could also say multisensory perception. We learn a lot about what we see, but we also learn a lot about what we hear, smell, even taste, and what we sense around our body and how we sense within our body, how our body reacts to the space around us. Fieldwork is also a practice. It is not a set series of steps. It changes and adapts to each situation it is in. So what is unique about our Buildings, Landscapes, Cultures Field School? Our Buildings, Landscapes, Cultures Field School is an interdisciplinary approach. This itself is not exactly unique to field schools. Many field schools, it's a strong tradition in archaeology, anthropology, and many other fields, but ours does draw in more guest scholars from a wide range of fields, from urban studies, history, geography, material culture, American studies, and even dance, theater, and so on. Our field school is an immersive research project. Again, many field schools do involve travel and staying on site, which could be quite far from the home institution. Ours is immersive in that we spend 9 to 5 on site. We eat meals together, we get to know people, and we develop long-term relationships. Although we are still in Milwaukee, where UWM is. The BLC Field School is quite unique and diverges from traditional field school approaches in that it is urban. Many field schools do focus more on vernacular architecture or rural identity, but ours focuses specifically on the urban to tell a very important story, and one that includes quite a lot of critical history. Our field school is collaborative. We, again, bring in a lot of guest scholars from different fields, but we also plan with our community members. We plan long-term, and we've learned through the years that it is best practice to return to the site rather than trying to find new sites year after year. We learn so much, and yet so little in the 6 weeks that we are on site. There's much more to learn and many more people to develop relationships with. Our field school is also long-term, and there are events that happen year-round. Of course, we do have a 6-week discrete summer project, but our field school documentation works to build a larger archive, one that we increase and expand in from year to year. There are also many other research projects that emerge from this BLC Field School archive, this kind of archive that we've built with our research, and many kind of, for lack of better term, spin-off projects. In this slide, you'll also get a glimpse of kind of the collaborative and immersive nature. We've got a number of students eating at a local cafe where we often had lunch, and documenting a performance with one of the cafe owners and a few children from the neighborhood. Everyone kind of gathered around. We're documenting this kind of cultural moment, but also taking place and enjoying it. So I want to give a little context in the annual timeline of the field school. I've laid out this slide according to color, focused on the 6-week summer program. But to the left, you'll notice that there are a number of things that we do in preparation for a field school. And then on the right side, things that we do after field school occurs. So Starting from the left, working to the right, we look in early spring, we prepare by planning ahead with developing goals with our community partners, agreements around what we will produce and how we will produce it, especially with respect to mindfully representing our community partners in their own words and giving them autonomy to help us develop that representation. We outline our project, we apply for grants, and we try to look for prospective students. In the early summer, just a few weeks ahead of the summer program, we will have a full day workshop with students, an introduction to the methods and research approaches, as well as covering some of the requirements such as internal review board and the documentation you need to have for research with human subjects, whether it is humanistic in nature or scientific. Our summer program is, of course, 6 weeks and generally falls into this schedule, starting with a 1 week of architectural documentation. In week 2, we gather oral histories, and this is different than interviews. No two oral histories are alike. We often start with some basic questions, but the conversation develops naturally, and we want to make sure that people tell the story they want to tell, rather than focusing on some of the stereotypes that often recur in the news, especially when we're considering urban neighborhoods that are whose residents are mostly people of color. In week 3, we delve into archival research. Archives can take many forms, from city records to architectural archives, such as those at Milwaukee Public Library, to a county assessor or a county clerk's records. But archives can certainly include family photo albums, scrapbooks, and much more. Week 4, we begin to develop our stories, starting to think about what forms our deliverables will take, whether they are websites, podcasts, printed out storyboards, exhibition materials, zines, or short documentary videos. There have been many forms of projects within the field school, and certainly sets of drawings as well. In week 5, we finalize these projects, and week 6, we critique and continue finalizing them, making sure there's a few rounds of feedback with community members. Those last 2 weeks are largely devoted to project development and finalization. After that, a week or 2, or maybe even as much as a month, we will have an exhibition on site in the neighborhood we've worked with. Recently, we've been working with Washington Park, and so we had a community exhibit inviting everyone we had interviewed for oral histories and anybody we collaborated with, so that we can get feedback from the people whose stories we have worked to tell collaboratively and who have a stake in those stories. In the fall semester, we process our data. This is kind of devoted to stewardship of our archives, but also transcribing oral histories, producing booklets that describe the field school research, updating our website, etc. Maybe some other independent projects with researchers, research fellows, and so on. This slide contains a rather intricate timeline of the field school, with the center part of the timeline in warm tones, starting in 2012 in Thurston Woods, moving into 2013 in a historic water tower neighborhood along the lake. But then we see starting in 2014, we've developed longer term commitments with the neighborhoods of Washington Park and then Sherman Park. And as these are kind of very close neighborhoods, actually bordering on each other, but more enmeshed. And many of the people we interview really kind of reside in both neighborhoods. Essentially from 2014, we've really worked with a lot of the same partners who know each other. Below that, I've described some of our partners and some of the major places the field school has occupied, as well as some of the products of each field school. And in the very bottom line, I've described some of the fun events and interesting forms that our research has taken, such as an art festival in 2014, a play based on the oral histories we gathered in 2016, Jane's Walks based on the methods of Jane Jacobs, where citizens lead us on a tour of their world, telling us in their own words what we're seeing, what the meaning is, and really with the power to tell their own history. Above that center row of warm tones, we see a series of graduate seminars and collaborative studios. These are the classes that happen in the fall and the spring that often build off of field school work and sometimes add to our field school archive. And then up above, we have kind of a separate project called the Milwaukee Environmental Justice Lab, where we take the contents of the archive and we look to tell stories about environmental justice, not just environmental racism, but also people who are actively working again to make Milwaukee more just in access to green spaces and access to better food and access to healthy water and so on. So the next few slides go over some of our research methods. One is walking interviews. In the summer of 2021, we opted to spend most of our time outdoors, and we would take walks with residents, guest scholars, community activists, and Milwaukee intellectuals, some UWM professors as well, sometimes multiple scholars at once. And we would document these walks. We would take notes, field notes, record, photograph, take video, etc. And people just kind of describe what they see, especially residents. In the photo on the right, one of the residents, Mr. Terrell, tells us all to pause for a moment and just listen. We hear kind of birds chatter, we hear calm, and then we hear a car pass by with some soul music, and it was a really peaceful, centering, kind of creative moment that we really enjoyed in a neighborhood that has been so stigmatized and which quite a lot of fear has been created around this neighborhood in the news. But our experience on the ground was quite different. We also do storytelling sessions, and these can be gatherings of architecture students, researchers, but also community leaders in which they get to speak to themselves, reaffirm their goals, and learn from each other. We also learn from them at the same time and develop a sense of shared commitment. As I mentioned, there are also Jane's Walks and community cleanups that we have participated in. Of course, I described Jane's Walks based on Jane Jacobs' methods. In the photo on the left, we see community resident Camille Mays, an activist and a community leader that we have collaborated with for a few years now. Camille is leading a tour of about 10 to 20 people through her neighborhood. We're documenting it, photographing it, and she is really telling us a lot about the history of the place, but also the vision that residents have for improving their neighborhood, making it a more just world. On the right, we again see the same slide from the title slide. A number of people gathered together in an open space. The space is Scholars Park, a parklet created by Sherry Fuqua, the person in the very front row in pink sweater and gray sweatpants. And in Scholars Park, we are installing this mural painted by Willie Weaver Bay, the person crouched beneath the painting with a big black hat on, smiling. And this is a moment of community pride, of stewardship, of caring for this space, but also knowing that this space provides calm and inspiration for the students who it was created for. It's created as a place for young scholars to go and read and center themselves, and a place of peace on the block. We also have community design events. These often take place in collaboration with design studios taught at the School of Architecture at UW-Milwaukee. And these might involve interactive artwork. In the photo on the left on the slide, we see a human-scaled depiction of a pedestrian symbol with a question drawn on the board that says, "What makes you slow down?" And we see a couple of kids going to write in their responses. We see other people walking around this green space, other tables, small business vendors selling artwork or food, and a number of people kind of together speaking with each other. On the right slide, we see a row of residential buildings modeled in chipboard, kind of a cardboard material, in which architecture students are meant to insert their models to show how it fits in with the street. In the background, we see some boards, and we see a couple of students discussing their designs. This looks like it's taking place in a community center. And one of the last projects I want to highlight, or last methods we have, are really community engaged methods that we developed based on our understanding of how or what community leaders needed when the pandemic first hit. This took place in summer of 2020. We decided to develop conversation starter kits because we had heard from our partners, such as Camille sitting on her porch in the middle photo, that the pandemic and the shutdown really forced a lot of people indoors, and a lot of conversations, a lot of chatter was just stopped. People stopped being able to talk to each other. And so we wanted to get that started up again. We developed a series of zines in a graduate seminar and in collaboration with students at Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. And we developed 4 thematic deliveries, one each week, in which we would take this printed material, these zines or informal booklets, along with a letter from a local historian that kind of gives context and introduces this project, a couple of stickers and a cloth mask. We put these envelopes of printed materials into bags with fresh produce from urban farms, and gave groups of these bags to our community partners in order for them to take them to other people's porches and have a conversation at a distance with a mask, and keep those conversations going, because those conversations are often about how people care for their world, how they care for their street, and how they keep that stewardship going. Those conversations, those weekly check-ins, they might seem like ordinary meetings, but they're really crucial to a healthy community. So that's a quick cross-section of several years of work and community engagement. And I hope it gives you a better background of what we do in the Buildings, Landscapes, Cultures Field School. Thank you so much.